Hi everybody and welcome back to class. So today our topic of the day is job interviews. So today we are going to be learning how to interview for a job, some of the questions that would be important to be prepared for, and questions that are commonly asked in the classroom. We are going to be starting off with a series. So this is a series we're going to be doing for the next week. The subject we're going to be learning this week, how to interview for a job, and I'm going to be showing this video series as well. I'm just going to show the first 2 minutes for this video, but it's a 7-minute video.
You're hired. 2 words everybody loves.
And it is a 5-part series. So this next week we will be watching these videos.
But before we hear these words comes the interview. Today's video is part 1 in a series that's all about preparing for a job interview. This is part 1 of a 5-part series on preparing for an interview. Interviewing for a new job can be a huge source of stress and anxiety. And if you're interviewing for a job in a non-native language, the stress can be even higher. In this video, you'll see me interview for a job. Throughout the interview, we'll discuss some of the most common interview questions and how to answer them. You'll also learn some basic information to get you started on creating your own answers to these questions. Let's begin.
Hello, Miss Smith. I'm Tom Kelly. Thanks so much for coming in.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for meeting with me.
Of course. Did you have any trouble finding the office?
Small talk. Most interviews will start out with a handshake and some small talk. This may include questions about how you're doing, your travel to the interview, the weather, how your weekend went, and more. All you need to do is be polite and friendly. Keep your answers short. You can also feel free to turn the question back to the interviewer. For instance, if the interviewer asks you how your weekend was, you might respond, "It was great. We celebrated my mom's birthday. How was your weekend?" Small talk is used to build a more comfortable environment before the interview begins. It may seem silly, but you can practice small talk on your own by asking yourself simple, easy to answer, non-personal questions. You could also...
Okay, so that video talked about, mostly that video focused on practicing small talk and a couple of the other questions that were mentioned. We are going to go over more in depth in this class. So we will be watching one of those videos. It's a 5-part series. We'll be watching one of those videos each lesson for the next couple of days this week, and just seeing kind of what she has to say about it and just going more in depth about some of the questions and preparing for some of the questions. So, but for today, for this class, there are 5 different questions that I want us to talk about and kind of prepare for on our own, because it's important to do. So we're gonna go over the questions. So in this video, you won't really be able to see it because it's going to be backwards, but this says common questions asked in a job interview. My PowerPoint. The first one is, tell me a little about yourself. So we're going to kind of brainstorm some things that, kind of like what she talked about in the video, just brainstorming a little bit of things to talk about when you're asked that in an interview, whether it's talking a little bit about the experience that you've had in that area of what you're applying in, or a little bit about where you're from, your country. So I'm going to talk also a little bit about how the differences and some things that may be a little bit more important to talk about depending on where you are applying. the country you're applying in. For example, if you're applying to a job in the United States and they asked you to tell them a little bit about yourself and you're Senegalese who had just moved to the United States and you're applying for a job there, it might be important to, or not necessarily, yes, important and also kind of interesting for them to hear a little bit about where you're from. Don't go too into depth about your country and your culture unless you're asked, of course, and that may be something that is asked. So it may be also good to kind of brainstorm right now and prepare a little bit for if someone were to ask you in an interview, if someone were to ask you a little bit more about, if you could tell them more about where you're from and your country and your culture, because that's something that really interests Americans sometimes, hearing that you're from a different country, especially a continent like Africa. So it might be good to prepare some things as a Senegalese that you would want to mention. Now, applying for a job here in Senegal as a Senegalese, applying for a job in an English interview, whether it's for in some sort of American or English speaking company, that kind of information would not be as relevant and would not be as focused on, because obviously you're in your own country, so people know more about it. So it might be good to prepare more so things that like your level of education, which is, of course would be important in an interview in the US as well. But I'm just mentioning some different things that may come up in an American interview versus, and that may be more prevalent in an American interview versus an interview here, versus an interview in America. So it may be important. So it would definitely be important to mention things about your level of education, how many languages you speak, and your and the level that you're in English especially. I mean, obviously, if you're applying for a job in the US, they're going to expect you to speak English, and that shouldn't be something that is really questioned. Or it may be something that comes up, and so it would be also important to be prepared to talk about that, talk about the level of English that you've gotten and where you've learned English, and etc., depending on who's interviewing you and what they ask you. So let's brainstorm really quick and write down your answers for tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay, the second question is, what attracted you to our company? So that is also a super important question. That's a very common question that you're going to be asked in job interviews. And it's important to kind of expand a little bit, not too much, but expand a little bit on your answers, whether it's someone, depending on what it is that attracted you to their company, whether it's something like their values or morals or whatever. And then, so let's brainstorm and write what answers we want to answer for those, and then we'll go over them later. And number 3 is, what is your greatest strength? So you guys can go ahead and write down things that you think are your greatest strengths and things that you would want to talk about in an interview. So whether that's your level of speaking in English, if you're applying for a job here in Senegal as a Senegalese, that may be something that's very prevalent and important to answer. Your level of English, or where you've spoken English, where you learned it. And number 4, how do you deal with pressure or stressful situations? It's also something that's a very common question in job interviews in English in America with English speakers. And number 5, do you prefer working independently or on a team? That's also another question that is important to think about and prepare an answer for in advance. So those are the 5 questions that we're going to be answering today and talking about. So I want you guys to just write down, write down at least 2 answers. The questions are going to be up on the board, so write down at least 2 answers for each of those questions. And then we're going to be role playing role playing. 2 of you are going to come up at a time. One is going to be the interviewer and is going to be asking these questions, and the other person is going to be the person applying for the job and is going to answer the questions that they have written down and prepared. So we're going to be working on that for the next 15 or so minutes, just preparing answers. I'll be walking around the room and helping you guys with your grammar and structure of your answers and just any other things, any other questions you may need help with. So, okay, so we're gonna have 2 people come up and practice this. And the rest of you are going to kind of evaluate in your head. Right now you can take some notes about the interview going on and evaluate how well you think they did, something you would change, things that stuck out to you that you really liked about their answers, and then we'll talk about those after. Okay, so now that we've finished with that, we are going to okay, so concluding, that took up a lot of time of class. We are going to conclude with the class today. So you all did very well. Next class, we are going to be learning more about different common questions that are asked in a job interview and ways to prepare for that, and answers to prepare, and what kind of things you may want to put in, what kind of things you may want to leave out. But I just want to end with, at the end of the day, in an interview, how you interview is important. How you answer the questions is important, and it's ultimately up to God whether you get the job or not. But it is good to be prepared for the answers that you're going to give, for the interviews that you're going to have. But ultimately, and at the end of the day, if God wants you to have the job, you're going to have the job. So you don't need to put so much pressure on yourself that you messed up, or it was something you said, or because of how you prepared, or your English, or whatever. But it is good, and that's why we're doing this now, preparing for interviews and things that may come up in the future in a job interview. And also if you were applying as a Christian, if you're applying to some sort of mission organization or ministry job interview, that would look a little bit different, and we're going to get into that later this week. But it would also be important to maybe write some sort of testimony, or write out some sort of testimony and be able to give your testimony in a short 3-minute time span, just so that that's something that's already prepared and already something that you have structured, but also very summarized, so that you're able to give it relatively quickly. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, guys, for your attention in this class. You all did very well. And that's it for today. So thank you. Bye.